What is the best NSFW historical fact you know? Story 1. Fath Ali Shah Qajar, second king in Qajar dynasty in Iran about 200 years ago, had 160 wives. Nassereddin Shah Qajar had about 50. In Islam, you're not allowed to marry more than 4 wives at the same time. It is said that Nassereddin Shah was once walking in his palace and saw a beautiful girl and asked if he could marry her. Everyone was looking at him weirdly, and he asked why. One of his servants said that she was his daughter. Story 2. The ancient city of Alexandria had one of the most famous red light districts, brothels, in the world. Once the prostitutes went on a strike and the economy of the city was at risk, so Cleopatra consulted one of the wise men in the library, and he suggested that they build another district as a competitor. Then they had 2 districts, and the prostitutes of the first district had to end their strike. Story 3. Mary Shelley lost her virginity at her mother's grave. Story 4. Charles II, Charles the Impotent, was the convergence point for several generations of royal inbreeding and was born with significant disabilities. His parents were desperate for him to produce an heir, so they implemented a system of ropes and pulleys to lower virgins onto him in hopes he could impregnate one. It didn't work, and the dynasty collapsed. Story 5. Ottoman Padishah Selim II died by stepping on a soap and falling while chasing girls in his harem. Story 6. In ancient Greece, prostitutes used to press "follow me" into their sandals so that when they walked it would imprint into the dirt or sand. So, when people saw it, they'd know that they could follow the trail and it would end in a prostitute and maybe some sex. There's a sculpture I love called the Slipper Slapper that shows Aphrodite and Pan, and she is, edit, my bad, this is not true, holding a sandal with "follow me" on the bottom. Story 7. Félix IV, French president from 1895 to 1899, died of a seizure while getting a blowjob. Story 8. The inventor of the modern bra had a dog named Clitoris. Story 9. The first thing the father of microbiology, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, put under a microscope was semen. They understood that semen was integral to the creation of life, but didn't yet understand the concept of single-cell organisms. Benjamin Franklin enjoyed older women. So much so he endorsed getting one as his mistress, giving reasons such as they can't have children, and that the sex was just as good, if not better, than courting a young woman. Sample of a letter. James Joyce wrote his wife, "My sweet little warish Nora, I did as you told me, you dirty little girl, and pulled myself off twice when I read your letter. I am delighted to see that you do like being fucked arseways. Yes, now I can remember that night when I fucked you for so long backwards. It was the dirtiest fucking I ever gave you, darling. European woman of the 17th century would bare one or both breasts as a sign of virtue. They often used wet nurses to preserve their breasts for public display." Nicholas Machiavelli, author of The Prince, gave this description of a prostitute who was reportedly so ugly, he threw up on her. "What the hell, Luigi? You can see what fortune can do to men. You had just finished fucking your woman when you want another one. I've been in Modena for several days when I came across an old woman who washes my shirts. She asked me to come to her hotel because she wished to show me some fine shirts. Innocent prick that I am, I went in. There was a woman over in the corner. 'This is the shirt that I wanted to sell you,' the hag said. I was terrified, but I fucked her. I found her thighs flabby and her cunt damp. Her breath stank, but I was horny. When I was finished, I took a torch and looked at her. I nearly dropped dead. The woman was ugly. She had a tuft of hair on her head, but her head was bald. Her forehead was scarred. One eye looked up, the other down. Her eyes were filled with mucus, and she had no eyebrows. Her nose was twisted into a funny shape. Her mouth looked like Lorenzo de Medici's, but was bent to one side. She was toothless, and saliva drooled out of her mouth. Her upper lip had a mustache. I looked at her stupefied. 'What's the matter, sir?' she asked me. As soon as she opened her mouth, such a stench came out that my eyes and my nose were assaulted, and my stomach indignant. They could not bear it, and I vomited all over her." Story 10. The Russians, especially among the nobility and aristocracy, were devotees of sexual foot tickling. They had learned it from the Tartar tribes. Foot tickling for sexual arousal was used in the Muscovite palaces and courts for centuries. Many of the Tsarinas, Catherine the Great, Anna Ivanovna, Elizabeth, Anna Leopoldovna, and others, were ardent participants. In fact, the practice was so popular that eunuchs and women were employed as full-time foot ticklers. They developed this unique skill so well that their occupations brought prestige and good pay. Anna Leopoldovna had no fewer than 6 ticklers at her feet, though more were employed to serve the other ladies of the court. The foot tickling was usually done on the private boudoir, While the ticklers performed their task, they also told Bodhi stories and sang obscene ballads, thus creating a sort of orgiastic atmosphere. All this, of course, was to work the ladies up to an erotic pitch so that they could meet their husbands or lovers in a sex-impassioned mood. It wasn't uncommon for these women to experience orgasms while being foot-tickled. The Sex Life of the Foot Nymph Shoe by William A. Rossi. Story 11. Mathematician Kurt Gödel suffered from mental illness and was paranoid he was going to be poisoned. He would only eat food his wife had prepared for him. In 1977, she was hospitalized for 6 months and could no longer prepare his food. In her absence, he refused to eat and eventually starved to death. He only weighed 65 pounds when he died. Story 12. William the Conqueror allegedly smashed his testicles on the pommel of his horse's saddle, which eventually killed him. But that's not the end of it. During his funeral ceremony, they had placed him in a stone coffin sarcophagus thing. It was unusually hot that day, and his body swelled. Well, the coffin did not. So, during his funeral, where he died by smashing his nuts, his body exploded. Story 13. After Nero kicked his wife to death, he met a young boy named Sporus. According to some, Sporus held somewhat of a resemblance to Nero's late, killed wife, Poppaea. And so, Nero had the boy castrated and married him. During the marriage, they appeared in public as a happy couple, as Nero paraded his new bride around to Greece and then back to Rome, where he had married another guy named Pythagoras, not the maths guy. Nero called Pythagoras his husband and called Sporus his wife. Sporus was labeled the Empress. A lot of people think that Nero took to Sporus because of the guilt he felt for kicking his wife to death, as he even called Sporus, Poppaea, the wife he kicked to death. Nero had issues in his classic NSFW history. He ran the gamut of MFK with his mom, killed his wife, castrated boys who looked like his dead, murdered wife, and kept them around for his pleasure guilt, married strong dudes, not that there's anything wrong with that, and ended up killing himself. I'm positive a lot of his history is propaganda, and I recognize how mental illness still goes diagnosed in today's world, not to mention the ancient world. Also, trying to look through the anti-Nero and revisions to find the truth is supremely challenging. But damn, that shit is fucked. Story 14. Elagabalus is my favorite. Super young Roman emperor who also was a transsexual prostitute. From Wiki, Cassius Dio reported that Elagabalus would paint his eyes, depilate his body hair, and wear wigs before prostituting himself in taverns, brothels, and even in the imperial palace. Finally, he set aside a room in the palace and there committed his indecencies, always standing nude at the door of the room, as the harlots do, and shaking the curtain which hung from gold rings, while in a soft and melting voice he solicited the passers-by. There were, of course, men who had been specially instructed to play their part, for, as in other matters, so in this business too, he had numerous agents who sought out those who could best please him by their foulness. He would collect money from his patrons and give himself airs over his gains. He would also dispute with his associates in this shameful occupation, claiming that he had more lovers than they and took in more money. Murdered at 18 by his own guards and thrown in the sewer, then they went so far as to remove his name from all temples and remove all traces of him from society. Story 15. Diogenes of Sinope, the great, the glorious, the one and only, would often defecate, urinate, and masturbate in public when he wanted to prove a point. That's the NSFW part. What's really the best thing about him and why he is the best Greek philosopher? Yes, obviously he was a philosopher, and why you should look up things about him written by people with better humor and articulation than me, is that one day, while he was lying in his barrel, which is where he lived, Alexander the fucking Great came over to him with his posse and said something the likes of, Diogenes, I have heard much about you and I am impressed. If there is anything I, Alexander, can do for you, just say the word. Diogenes, without even looking up, responded, yeah, you can do something for me. Get out of my sunlight, I'm trying to get some color here. To which the shocked Alexander could say nothing more than, I'm not even mad, this is some big dick magic at work, before turning to his men and saying, if I was not born Alexander, I very much would have liked to be born Diogenes. Hearing that Diogenes commented, if I was not born Diogenes, I would also have liked to be born Diogenes. Story 16. Elizabeth Bathory was a countess who lived in the Carpathian Mountains. She was one of the inspirations of Dracula, and her nickname was Countess Dracula. She was possibly the most prolific serial killer in history. She believed that blood on her skin made her fresher and younger. She was responsible for the killing of 650 girls. Many were tortured for weeks and were often naked when they were tortured. They were forced to eat their own flesh. She sometimes drank the blood of the girls and stabbed them with needles. Some had their face, hands, and private parts burned and bit their flesh and private parts. Many of them starved to death. Others were burned or froze to death naked. She might have eaten some of her servants. It is possible that she bathed in blood. She was never put on trial but was forced to stay in one room for the rest of her life. She died 4 years later. So this is the end of the story. Tell me what you think about these stories in the comment section. Like and subscribe for more videos.